My story starts July 2017 in New Haven, Connecticut. I'm in my fourth and final year of residency at Yale to be a psychiatrist. And so this means I've done 4 years of college, 2 years of a master's degree, 4 years of medical school to just get the MD. And, after I finish this fourth year, I would finally be a specialist, a psychiatrist, able to supervise others, not a trainee. So the rest of my story, unfortunately, is about me still as a trainee, which means I had to attend one of these dreadful, weekly lectures for 3 hours about topics that nobody ever really wanted to listen to. And this one, the lectures were typically led by Dr. David Ross, who's the head of education for all Yale psychiatrists. And so just to give you a bit of background, so this lecture in particular was at the start of the year, and it was about how to negotiate your first job. So it's me and my cohort of 14. And this is actually, I was interested in this one because I was getting a job. One, out of a class of 14, I was the only one who was actually going on the job market. Everyone else was staying to be a fellow and continue their training. And not only would I be negotiating with, my mentors of 3 years at Yale, but I would be potentially leaving the state and negotiating outside of New Haven, Connecticut. So, the stakes were high, right? So one, I'm queer, I'm Black, I'm all with this flair. In medicine, which is, conservo. Two, I'm all this in 2017 in Trump's America. Three, my partner, who is an immigrant woman going up for tenure in DC, 6 hours away, we need each other. And then I didn't personally finance my medical education, so, I have $1 trillion worth of educational debt to pay off. So you better believe I was gonna be raising my hand because I needed a job, right? So let's fast forward. Lecture actually starts, and Dr. Ross starts putting up some graphs about how much you can expect to make in terms of the average and the median in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York, and then he just moves on. So one of my classmates, noticing this is a little bit off, raises her hand, and she says, well, I guess I just have a question about the disparity in pay between, women and men, that old thing, right? And first, before I go on, let me tell you a little bit more about David Ross. So he is a white male who is from Connecticut, went to Yale for undergrad, went to medical school at Yale, trained at Yale maybe about 20 years ago, and is now the head of education. He's brilliant, right? He can make neuroscience interesting to anyone, but he also has a bit of an ego, and this is well known to the department. And he can get pretty aggressive when you challenge him, even with trainees. So asking a question is definitely a risk. So you can imagine how he responds to my colleague's question. He essentially says, well, yeah, there's a pay gap, but you can read all about that, and it doesn't really apply to you. You're coming from Yale, everyone's gonna want you. And then he keeps going. Like, what kind of answer? So I'm not gonna take it, right? Because I'm going to job market, I need this job. Like, you are gonna answer this question. I raised my hand. I say, well, just to sort of back up on this, not only am I a woman, but I'm Black, and I'm gonna be sitting in front of my mentors of 3 years and potentially know that I'm gonna leave this room that I might make how much less just because of my gender and the color of my skin. Like, can we talk about this? So he says to me, Callie, I'd hate for you to miss out on opportunities and project your fear of discrimination in front of the entire class. And no one says a thing. So it takes a little while before things hit me. I'm sitting in the back, and I'm thinking, wait, project, that means that maybe it's not actually real. Worry too much. If I worry too much, then I'll actually make it worse. Discrimination. Wait, he's telling me that my discrimination might not actually be real, and I'm the Black, he's not Black. So by the time I get through that, I'm livid, and I have to sit through this 3-hour lecture, and I'm antsy. I just want to get out of this room. And I realized that he made it my problem. The disparity in pay and racism, come on, is like not one person's problem in my head. And he made it my problem. I was pretty distraught, but no matter how much, how distraught I was, I had to do something. I needed a job. So, I filed my complaint online and get it on the record. I met with his boss, and then I set up a meeting with him thinking maybe behind closed doors we'd actually be a bit more vulnerable, which was a mistake, honestly. So fast forward, I actually end up meeting with him and said, how do you think it must have felt with you saying that in front of an entire class, that, questioning whether or not I'm worrying too much about discrimination as when you are, a white guy. And, I technically am more of an expert on discrimination in general, if we want to go there, but definitely at least about queer Black women. And his response is, I don't think I did anything wrong. So in an attempt not to just completely flip out and get out of the room, I suggest that, okay, well, let's cut our losses. Maybe next year you can just include some graphs, right, of not just Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York, but maybe about what the pay disparity is between the races or between the genders. And he says, oh, no, that's not my unit. That's, the brown lady's professor who does cultural competency. And I leave his office, and I'm thinking, what the fuck? What reality am I living in, right? So one, not only did he just reject my reality in a classroom of people who didn't say anything, who probably, maybe they confirm, my reality is just not even true. Then behind closed doors, he gaslights me, telling me, yeah, that was your reality, which is not right, and I'm doubling down on it. And it doesn't even, bat an eye. And two, he does it, again, in a classroom, in a position of power as a cisgendered white male. One, I forgot to mention this, his wife, he's married and has a child, is responsible for the full child rearing. So he has ample time to work on his research and, sort of progress. And he's telling this class that discrimination is, yeah, it's a thing, but don't worry about it. It doesn't apply to you. One, that so much it doesn't matter. We don't need to talk about it in this classroom, nor do we need to even talk about your fears or your feelings. And we're psychiatrists. Like, what is this? And this happens imagine how often this happens, not just in classrooms, in conference rooms, in, at coffees or in auditions or whatever it is that people like Ashley Judd do, right? Like, this happens everywhere, and white men get away with it. And we end up getting paid less, and that's the narrative that stands. So at the end of the day, I still had to get a job. So my solution was, one, I did my own research. So what was the amount, what was the average, what was the mean that I needed to be aiming for? How do I put in numerical terms, some of my skills, teaching that may not be something that is listed with a monetary value. Two, I reached out to one of my really close colleagues who's the only other essentially Black female who was an early career psychiatrist at Yale, and she shared everything with me. She shared her offer letter. She shared the amount that she got, the timeline of when she met, how much she asked for, what she said no, and, coached me along the way. And three, I forced myself to go to what I would call the straight white ladies groups, where people usually talk about when to time a pregnancy, and it doesn't really feel relevant to me, and force them to have coffee with me and ask them all the questions that I needed to ask. How did you get part-time? What mistakes did you make? What kind of recommendations do you have? And essentially, I asked them to talk about women's problems in a way that were also my women's problems. And it worked. So at the end of the day, I sat in that room and I negotiated like a deer in headlights. I knew whatever number they threw out, which was pretty much a little above the average. And I just said no. I said no. And I ended up getting more money. Not only that, I ended up being appointed to director of a major educational program at Yale that full professors actually applied to. So I got my dream job, at least on paper. And now in this position that I'm in, I give it back. I share my offer letter. I share what kind of conversations to have, with the people you're sitting down with. And I don't just share it for, the female trainees or the Black trainees, but, everyone, no matter what color, what sexuality, what gender you identify with, because that's what we need to do. This is not just one person's problem. It's everyone's. So, time's up.